Welcome to Return to Home with Michele Broxton, where we go over 100 years back in time to yours and mine, to yours and my great-grandma's favorite recipes. Today we're going to be making Dutch oven beef stew and Angel Biscuits. First, we're going to look at our vegetables. I'm going to show you what we've got. We're going to talk about how to properly brown our stew meat so it's nice and tender and juicy. And then I'm going to show you how to make a beef broth and those mile-high Angel Biscuits. The thing that's going to take the longest in this is browning our stew meat and getting it nice and tender. So let's get that started first. If you have any bacon grease or any kind of meat grease that you've saved from another dish, you can use that. If you don't, you can just use regular vegetable oil. So just in case you don't, I'm going to go ahead and use regular vegetable oil. So let's turn our skillet on, let's say medium-high heat. And we'll just lightly coat the bottom of our pan. Now you can also use butter for this. Y'all know how much I love butter. Once that gets to a sizzling point, we're going to add our meat, and we're also going to add some kosher salt and black pepper. Let's go ahead and do that now. We're going to thoroughly coat the bottom of our pan with kosher salt and black pepper. Now you can add into this mix whatever spices seem like they would taste good to you in a beef stew. The other thing I think I'll go ahead and do is let's cut up our onions. I like to use yellow onion for hot things and white onion for cold things. I think I've told y'all this before, but just in case I haven't, when you're peeling an onion, you want to take off the outer 2 layers of the onion. Just till you get down to the slick part. We don't want any of that peeling in our food, so I try to keep all of the brown peeling off of my chopping surface. Sometimes it takes just a minute, and that's okay. One of the things that cooking well teaches us is patience. I think this is going to take 2 onions. I might do an onion and a half. I'm going to set that aside for just a minute and see how we do. You may want to dice your onion in small pieces. I like my onion a little chunkier. A lot of times I'll take that little eye out of there because I just don't think it tastes very good. So now it looks like our pan is nice and hot, so we're going to go ahead and put our meat in. Oh yeah. This is regular stew meat. Now if you know my philosophy on meat, you know that I like to let it sit out for about 30 minutes and come to room temperature. I think I'm going to put just a little more oil in there. Now let's add our onions. There's 2 things I always cook with my meat, and it's typically the onions and my garlic. Now I do have some beef base that's pre-made. I'm going to save most of this to make my broth with, but I am going to go ahead and sprinkle some right on top of my meat to flavor it. That's going to be really good. And I think 1 onion was enough. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to wash my potatoes, my carrots, and my celery, and we're going to come back and chop those up. That is really smelling nice. Let's add a little minced garlic. We're going to let that meat get just a little more brown on the bottom, and while we're doing that, let's go ahead and chop some of our vegetables. Now I've washed and scraped some of these vegetables. The carrots have been washed and scraped, and the celery has been washed and scraped. I did leave the skin on the potatoes because it has so much nutritional value to leave the skins on, so I typically do leave the skins on. You're more than welcome to peel your potatoes if you'd like. The most important part of this process is that all of the pieces of any vegetable that you put in here are roughly the same size as the meat. The reason why is because you want them to all cook at about the same length of time. So when you look in your pot and you see the pieces of stew meat, just think about how big those pieces of stew meat are. They're about that big. So we're going to make our vegetables about that big as well. Does that make sense? I think so. And as I get these done, I'm just not too fancy with it. I just throw them in. I like it when my vegetables get a little brown while I'm cooking them. I'm going to show you how to do the celery too while we're at it. You can do this a couple different ways. You can score it down the middle and then chop it, or you can just chop it in big hunks. I prefer to chop it in hunks. Here's where size really matters. This is a pretty big piece, so we're going to make this a little bit smaller. I chopped it down the middle. Sometimes I just eat these pieces. I don't throw them in. Okay. Making a stew is a lot about what foods do you like and at what ratios do you like them. I'm not a huge fan of carrots, but they're really good for my kids' eyes, so I always try to throw a few carrots in. And I am going to slice these up really tiny because I kind of want to hide them in the gravy. Sometimes if they're too big, the kids just push them over to the side and they won't eat them. Carrots are a pretty strong vegetable, so a little dab will go a long way. Doesn't that look nice? I love fresh carrots out of the garden. We're just going to continue doing that until we have the right ratio that we like of stew meat to vegetables. And then I'm going to show you how to make a broth, a nice beef broth. Y'all, this is smelling so good. I hope you love this beef stew just as much as we do. You can make it from all ingredients fresh from your garden or the grocery store or your local farmer's market, whichever is most convenient for you. Now, if you're like me and you like things just a little crispy and toasty, you'll do what I just did, which is start this from a kind of a dry base. So if you'll notice, we started by sauteing our meat in a little bit of oil, or you can use butter or another type of, bacon grease or chicken grease, all those things that taste good. Next, we added our vegetables, we added our spices, we added our garlic, and things are about halfway as soft as I'd like for them to be, and it's really smelling good. What we're going to do now to finish this off and make sure everything stays really moist and juicy is we're going to make what's called a beef broth, and I'm going to show you exactly how to do that. It's really simple. The first ingredient is simply to add a little bit of water. And all we're trying to do is just keep the vegetables and the meat that's in here from sticking to the bottom of the pan while we make this broth. I'm going to give it one more stir. Next, we're going to add our beef broth seasoning. Now, you can do this a few different ways. I have a dry seasoning that I purchased from a community that is near to our farm here at Ozark Farms in Rolla, Missouri. If you don't have homemade beef broth seasoning, you can buy beef bouillon either in a jar or in the little cubes. That'll work just fine. Any of that will work just fine. What we're going to do is we're going to put it in, and this is about 3 tablespoons of that broth. Now, you can do that either in the cubes, there'd be 3 cubes, or 3 tablespoons of the bouillon that comes in a jar. I've got this dry rub, and it's so yummy. I'm going to sprinkle that right on top. So delicious. I'm going to add a little more kosher salt. Potatoes really soak up the salt, y'all. But as a general rule, you can put more salt in. You can put more salt in, but you can't take it out. And a little black pepper. Now there are so many different ways you could go with these vegetables. You could add fresh garden vegetables, you could add peppers, you could add green beans, you could add peas. It's really whatever you think your family will eat. It is such a hearty, wonderful meal. And like I said, you can make it with vegetables fresh from your garden, fresh from the farmer's market, or fresh from the grocery store. Whatever works best for you. That is mixed together really nicely. So now that the dry rub is all mixed together with that juice that we put in the bottom of the pan, we know that we can just go ahead and add the rest of our water. And we're going to just cover our meat and our vegetables with water. Now later on in this process, I'm going to show you how to thicken this and make a nice brown gravy. Perfect. You can cook this covered or uncovered. Either way is totally fine. It's at this point in time, I always try to tell you what point that's going to be. Your family's going to start coming in the kitchen and they're going to want to know what type supper is going to be. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to make some Angel Biscuits, and you may want to pour this on top of your Angel Biscuits, so you might want to tell them to wait just a little bit for the biscuits to get done. This is smelling so good. Let's go ahead and make our Angel Biscuits. Now, if y'all are from the South, or maybe if you even aren't, you might have seen those really big, tall, fluffy butter biscuits. I'm going to show you the secret for how to make those at home. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to start with the yeast mixture. And you may think, wait a minute, are we making dinner rolls? No, we're making biscuits, and I'm going to show you how to make them just this way. Okay, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add a 1/4 cup of water to our yeast. Just like that. Now, yeast is hungry, so we got to give it a little bit of food. And it sure does like sugar, like you and I do. So let's add in 1/2 teaspoon of sugar. And we're going to stir it up. And that's going to just do nicely. If you're wondering how much yeast I had in here, you can use 1 package of Rapid Rise instant yeast, or if you have the jar of yeast, that means it's 2.5 teaspoons of yeast. That will just work its little magic there, and now we're going to work on the rest of our biscuit dough. first, let's get 2½ cups of all-purpose flour. If you're going to measure flour like I do, don't measure the full cup because you're going to end up with a little too much flour. So see how I leave a little room at the top? That'll keep you from having to measure the fancy way. So you just leave a little room at the top. Because you're actually packing the flour into your cup scooper, and you could end up with 1 1/3 cups of flour if you do it level. Did you know that? Okay. Next, we're going to add in a teaspoon of baking powder. It's important to mix in all your dry ingredients first and then your wet ingredients. 1/4 cup of white granulated sugar, teaspoon of salt, and then we're going to whisk this all together just until it's combined. Now, if you ever watch somebody make homemade biscuits, you know that sometimes the recipe will call for an egg-sized serving of lard. I'm going to use this size right here, which is about right. We're also going to cube up some unsalted butter that's cold. But this recipe only calls for 1/4 cup of butter because we already put the shortening in there. So we're going to save some of that butter for later to brush on top. I tell you, our beef stew is smelling so good. Every once in a while, give it a little stir just to make sure it's not sticking to the bottom. Now what we'll do next is we're just going to mix this in well until the butter and your shortening is mixed in well with your flour mixture. If your arm gets tired, just move your finger down on the fork a little bit and it'll give you a little better grip. That looks just fine. What we're looking for is to make sure that every bite of flour is also going to have a bite of shortening and a bite of butter. The next thing we'll do, oh yeah, our yeast is looking really good and bubbly. The next thing we'll do is we're going to make our buttermilk. Now to make buttermilk, and this calls for 1 cup of buttermilk, we are just going to, remember our ratios, it's 1 cup of milk to a tablespoon of lemon juice. You can also use white vinegar. And listen, you don't have to use fresh squeezed lemon if you don't have it at home. You can use just regular lemon juice, that'll be fine. I just like fresh squeezed lemon juice. That's about 1/2 of a lemon squeezed. Just gonna stir that around. Let's smell it. Oh, that smells like really nice buttermilk. Okay. We're going to make a well in the middle of our flour. And we're going to do 2 things. We're going to put our buttermilk and our yeast right in the middle. Looking good. Next, we're going to just mix our flour in from the sides toward the middle. Some people use their hands for this. I just tend to use a fork. Okay. At this point in time, I'm going to switch over to something that I can get the biscuit dough off the bottom. Boy, that came together really nicely. Okay, let's roll it out. Let's flour our surface and roll out our Angel Biscuits. I like my biscuits to be nice and fluffy, so we don't want to roll them out too much. Perfect. It's nice when a plan comes together, isn't it? Now at this point you can see your chunks of shortening and your chunks of butter in here. I don't want you to be alarmed. That's perfectly normal. It's going to make your biscuits taste fantastic. We're going to leave your biscuits pretty tall because I like tall biscuits. Let's sprinkle a little flour on our counter and get our biscuit cutter ready. You can use different size jar lids for this. I like the big size. Swirl it around and cut out your biscuit. Now for this, since these are mile-high biscuits, you want to use a straight down and straight up motion. That's going to make a really nice biscuit. You can tell that this dough has yeast in it. It's already starting to rise right here on the counter. Now remember, when we make biscuits, we're not concerned if they aren't shaped just perfectly round every time. Sometimes I like to eat the ones that aren't shaped just so perfect. Now, when you have these recipes, make 6 biscuits. And remember, I showed you what to do with all the end pieces to make your 6th biscuit. You just pile them up on high, make a tower, and push it down. Just like that. And then shape it in to make your 6th biscuit. And there you go. Angel Biscuits. Let's get them in the pan. This beef stew is really starting to come together nicely. What we want to do next is get it ready to go on our Angel Biscuits. Now, our Angel Biscuits are in the oven and they're rising, and it is just coming along so beautifully. But I don't know about you, I like for my beef stew to be in just a little bit of a gravy. You know, it's kind of thick. I'm going to show you how to do that with cornstarch. You want to have a little bit of cold water and just a little bit of cornstarch in a cup. Add a little bit of water, and then we're just going to stir. There really is no right or wrong method to this. If you need a little more cornstarch, just sprinkle it a little more in. You want it to feel like watered down Elmer's glue. We're getting close. If you get too much cornstarch in, it'll grab your fork and kind of make a paste. No worries, just add a little more water. That feels really good. Now, what we'll do is we're going to turn our fire down just a little bit, because once this catches hold in your beef broth, it can catch hold really quickly. And we want to give ourselves enough time to react, just like in life. So what I do when I'm stirring in a thickening agent is I go ahead and I get everything moving. And now I'm going to pour this in just a tiny bit at a time. Now remember what we said about gravy? Heat will make it thicken, and also when it gets cold, it will thicken. So you're not going to take this all the way to where you want it right now. You're going to take it a little ways at a time, and understand that as time goes on and as it gets hot, and then as it cools down, it'll get even thicker. That's really feeling nice. I think we made just the right amount. We're going to let that simmer for just a few minutes and thicken into our beef gravy while the Angel Biscuits are in the oven rising, and then we're going to bake those at 400 for about 12 minutes. Before we bake them, we want to brush on just a little bit of heavy whipping cream and butter. Check our recipe on our blog at ozarkfarms.org for all the recipe details. I hope y'all have enjoyed making beef stew today in our kitchen and Angel Biscuits. Now, I don't know about you, but I like to have my beef stew and biscuits in a bowl. Now, you can do this any way you want to. You can have your biscuits separate on the side of a plate. Now, you can do this any way you want to. You can have your stew in a bowl and your biscuits separate. In the country, we like to put our biscuits down first and then put our stew on top. Sometimes we'll put mashed potatoes down and the stew on top. Either way, there's just nothing quite like gravy on top of a biscuit, so let's do that now. I like my biscuits real done, so if you'll notice these are nice and toasty on top, I'll tell you a little secret that I did when I put them in the oven. I put a little bit of heavy whipping cream on the top just before I put them in the oven. Those are just the perfect cross between a yeast roll and a biscuit right there. So yummy. I'm going to put that right into my bowl. We're going to put some stew right on top. Actually, I might put it on the side this time because I really like to eat the top of my biscuit while it's crunchy. Give that a good stir, and I think we'll use a ladle to get it out. Since our meat's been simmering all this time, it's so nice and tender, and all of our vegetables are in there. What a nice hearty meal for your family. I really hope you love this. If you want the recipe, you can go to ozarkfarms.org and just look up beef stew. Doesn't that look nice? I really hope you enjoy this recipe. And I hope you join me next time right here on Return to Home with Michele Broxton, where we go through all of our great-grandma's 100-year-old vintage recipe favorites, just like she did on her wood stove in her old kitchen. Except we're here, together, in our kitchen. See you soon.